Hi everyone, it's Well Starbursts, and welcome to the 7th episode of my Minecraft building tutorial series, Creative Mode. If you don't already know about the series, I will be explaining the elements and principles of design, such as shape, color, contrast, and the like, and how they can relate to building in Minecraft. Oh, and I'm using the VoxelBox Palcyon texture pack throughout the series, and at specified times I will also use the VoxelBox Organics texture pack. In this episode, we're going to review the principle of contrast, one that I believe most people are already familiar with. Contrast describes the degree of difference between uses of any element. For example, we can create a very contrastic composition through using value when we put a black block on a white background, and vice versa. We can also create contrasting colors by doing the same thing with complementary colors. Contrast can be used for a variety of purposes. The three most common uses of contrast are to add visual interest, draw a viewer's focus to certain points in the composition, or set an overall mood for the build. Almost universally, contrast is used in some form to add interest to a build. Simply by using different blocks, a builder is using some form of contrast. Some great examples of commonly used contrast methods are employed by the two builders Yville and AndyBZ17 in their town, Bedlam. We can easily see the differently colored, valued, and textured blocks that are used in their palettes to create contrast and add interest to their builds. If we look closer, we can break down exactly how they achieved this. When looking at any build in Bedlam, and in fact most good builds here on the VoxelBox, we find that there are two components to the walls. There are blocks that are used for trim and blocks that are used for walls. A build's trim blocks tend to resemble the general structure of the build, while main wall blocks fill in the remaining gaps. Also, trim tends to encompass these regular wall colors and contrast with them in terms of their color, texture, value, or really any other element, and even some principles. As a result, the combination of trim blocks and main wall blocks tends to make the build more interesting to look at. Contrast may also be used to draw interest to certain areas of the build to create the principle of emphasis. We'll go further into the principle of emphasis in another video, but in this way, contrast acts more like an element. This boat, built by Alexander, uses contrast in just such a way. The intensity of the colors that are used in the ship are much greater on the top of the ship's deck, and because of this, a viewer's eye is drawn to that area more frequently. Thus, through the use of contrasting colors, he created the principle of emphasis. But most importantly, contrast can be used to set an overall mood for a build. Heavily contrasting elements tend to create a gloomy or ominous atmosphere, while less contrast tends to create a light, easygoing, or pristine environment. An example of a more gloomy environment comes from the dilapidated remains of Mistvale, built by Gnarlas. Contrasting values and colors play a key role in the emphasis of the town's condition. The town is in ruin, so it should give off a darker vibe. It achieves this through the large contrast in value and color. In the palette of the build, we see only gray blocks, but the differences in the values is very great. A stark contrast of dark and light values tends to create a gloomy environment, and this concept is illustrated perfectly along Lake Mistvale. In addition to this, contrasting of pure values and actual colors tends to give off the same foreboding appearance. The opposite effect is achieved in the city of Ionius, built by the guy who can fly. Instead of using very contrasty elements, he instead incorporated lighter valued blocks and chose not to incorporate largely contrasting elements as central components of his builds. This effect is especially prevalent in the palace area of the build. As said before, the lack of contrast creates a more pristine and complacent looking area. Now keep in mind that other elements besides color, value, and texture can contrast, but those three are some of the most evident and thus the most important. But that's all there is for a basic understanding of contrast. Just remember that it describes the degree of difference between elements and can be used to add visual interest, draw a viewer's focus to certain points in the composition, or to set an overall mood for the build. I hope you guys enjoyed, and thanks for watching.